Hey gang, it's Dr. G, the Imaginarium. If you're new here, I'm Erik Goodwyn, fantasy author as well as Jungian scholar, lecturer, and I'm also a practicing psychiatrist. My novel, King of the Forgotten Darkness, is coming out April 1st. Yes! Woohoo! The link is in the description, check it out. But anyway, we're here to talk about Avatar The Last Airbender. So, Avatar The Last Airbender ran on Nickelodeon in '05 to '08. And it has no nostalgic power over me because at that time I wasn't in middle school, but I was a psychiatric resident. In any case, however, my boys were in their early teens, the ideal target age for this show. And they raved about it so much that when I finally got around to giving it a look, I did. And this was right around the time my first grandchild was born. So, yes, I came late to the party, but let's just say I was highly impressed. If you've never seen Avatar: The Last Airbender before, first of all, what are you doing here? And second of all, if you're a fantasy fan, you need to stop what you're doing, which would be liking and subscribing, of course, and then go watch the show. It's wonderful. I can say if I had watched this show in my early teens, I probably would have loved it. But at that time frame for me, it was more about the era of Stranger Things is set in. Okay, in other words, the early '80s bonkers fantasy movies like Dragon Slayer, Neverending Story, Labyrinth, Dark Crystal, all that kind of stuff. And of course, it was Star Wars. But we really didn't have anything like this, though. And after having seen it, I can say I understand what the hype is about. Which brings me to why I'm making this video. I think one of the reasons why this show is so good is the way that it uses universal or archetypal symbolism and brings it together seamlessly and beautifully to weave together a story of transitioning from childhood to adulthood. And it's done in a way that's much deeper than the way this is usually done in this kind of story. I mean, it tackles real emotional issues that plague us at this awkward age. It deals with them realistically and in a balanced way, which is funny because this is a fantasy story, right? And you typically think, well, fantasy is just wild la la land, random stuff. But of course, if you're familiar with what I talk about on this channel, that's anything but true. And in fact, in fantasy, we can actually explore emotional patterns and emotional realities in a way that is unique among genres because we use symbols in fantasy, and those symbols can represent things on a deeper level than we can really even just express. So even stories that are so-called realistic don't quite have this ability that fantasy does. In any case, from a guy who writes on dream interpretation, depth psychology, as well as fantasy fiction, I saw the patterns in this show. And I wanted to talk about them and explain why I think they're so psychologically brilliant. So first, let's take the organization of the world of Avatar: The Last Airbender. You've got the Fire Nation, the Air Nomads, the Water Tribe, and the Earth Kingdom. This is an alchemical map of the psyche, and it tracks into very common, i.e. archetypal elements that you can find in pretty much any sort of psyche around the globe, regardless of culture. We all have a very strong tendency to make symbols like this. And in this case, we are mapping very common universal human emotional and psychological functions onto these visual and concrete images. Let me explain. So, for example, inspiration and passion is being mapped onto fire. Sensation and strength, and that psychological strength, maps onto earth. Intellect and balance onto air, and then feeling and value onto water. This is not unique to this show at all. These are patterns I see in dreams reported to me in therapy, for example, all the time. These are elements in common folktales and mythology. These are archetypal. Through the story, the elements flow into each other through the movements and the adventures of the main characters. And each element has its representative in the show. Aang, it represents the air, Zuko represents fire, Toph represents earth, and the combination of Katara and Sokka represent the water. Like all alchemical narratives, the ultimate goal of spiritual improvement or individuation that's embedded in these stories is to achieve mastery of the four elements. So what does that mean psychologically? Well, it means that in our goal to become better, to become more mature, to become more balanced, or even to seek connection to the divine, which is often mapped onto things like the elixir of life or the philosopher's stone. What we have to do in order to accomplish this goal in these kinds of narratives and dreams is to master the different elements of ourselves. So it's an inner journey, and the inner journey is complex and it's very difficult to grasp. And so in order to make sense of it, we map it onto a physical external journey that is symbolic of the inner process. Now, the way that Avatar: The Last Airbender does this is that it's creating a very exciting and fun story for kids of all ages, but because it uses the symbolism, it creates a very psychologically satisfying story. It feeds into our story creating and story craving brains. Remember, stories are not just random elements and random events. I mean, they can be, but the ones that last are ones that express meaning through symbols. And a story, especially a fantasy story, says that this complex inner situation works as if this story is unfolding. And in this case, it's the process of growing up and becoming more mature and becoming more empowered is as if I'm a character in a fantasy land divided into these different functions, earth, fire, water, and air, and they're scattered and they're in conflict. My mind operates as if it were a divided land. But despite the scary situation, there's hope. Because when these elements combine and our daily adventures and trials combine the elements together as we grow, ultimately we can achieve balance and become strong and capable adults. This is a version of the coming of age story type, but that just calling it that just lumps it into a category. It doesn't really tell us about the artistry it's crafted with or the very human elements of humor, sorrow, shame, and anger and triumph that makes the story hit so hard. So that's I think more useful to do about this particular story is to look at it from that perspective of, yes, it's a coming of age story, but it does it really, really well, and these are the reasons why. Take a look, for example, at Zuko. Zuko and Aang. So Zuko's character arc mirrors Aang's to a degree, in the sense that both of them go from a position of early one-sidedness through hardship and physical journeys through exposure to the other elements to a place of balance and self-mastery. Aang has to overcome naivete and ignorance, whereas Zuko has to overcome pride and aggression. And the story shows us how these flaws are overcome through a physical external journey through the elements. But what it's mapping and it's symbolic of is the inner journey that we have to go through. And it does it very accurately. Now, let's just talk about one of the, I think, greatest side characters of all time, Uncle Iroh. I mean, this guy is amazing. And he's just cruising along with Zuko, dispensing wisdom that finds parallels in Buddhist teachings as well as Stoic philosophy, and it's brilliant. It's sort of like an extended cut of what Yoda would be like for Luke. Okay, this guy drops truth bombs like a B-52 bomber at Midway. And one of the greatest lines in this, or really any other fantasy that I've come across, belongs to him. When he says, "Pride is not the opposite of shame, but its source. True humility is the only antidote to shame." This is so powerful, and it's very true. Although I would tweak this to make it say excessive shame. Shame is a natural part of the human condition, and because it reflects the innate desire to work with others and not hurt others. Yes, we can ignore this. Yes, we can be jerks and all this kind of thing, but it's still there. Now, excessive shame, however, sometimes is caused by a deeper hidden desire for perfection, and the shame is an expression of our outrage at falling short of this perfection that we are dreaming of. But as you can see, the problem is the perfectionism. Once you replace it with humility, you become immunized against excessive shame. Of course, one of the most beloved characters is Appa, the sky bison. And even this element has, of course, precedent in folk tales, as in the helpful animals that contain nature's wisdom within them. And in characters like this, if they can talk, it always pays to listen to them. This is a lesson that is never violated in folk tales all over the world. If a character accepts help from animals, they succeed. Help from animals, and this is why, is help from animals reflects this universal human tendency to represent elements of oneself as animals, the instinctive parts of the mind. So if you're helping them, it means you're getting more in touch with your own instincts. But what's your take on Avatar: The Last Airbender? Do you have a favorite character? Do you think I'm right that Uncle Iroh is the greatest of all time, up there, or at least one of, up there with characters like Sancho Panza or Samwise Gamgee? Did you even like the show? Let us know in the comments. And until next time, I'll see you later.